Let's talk about spring boxwood care. We have all 4 of the new Better Boxwood varieties in the garden, and we're just going to go through a few things that you can do in the spring. Obviously, you can plant boxwoods in the spring, no doubt about that. This is a good time of year to get them. They're hardy in zone 5 to 9, and so typically the soil's a little more moist. The earlier you get them in the ground, the better for sure. We have pretty highly amended soil here. If you have clay-based soil, you might want to mix some pine bark soil conditioner or something in that will create a little bit of drainage, but they're adaptable to most soil types. And really one of the staples of the garden because, you know, they are so low maintenance overall. But here, you know, coming out of winter, early spring, if you've got things to do on them, this would be the time to do it. And so for us, that involved moving one of them. We had one back here just completely surrounded. When we planted it, it made total sense because all the other plants around it were about the same size. And then this is what happens in gardening. You plant, you know, you put something in and then a year or two later, you realize you've slightly misplaced it in some way or another. I do want to point out though, that look how full this Renaissance boxwood actually is in what was a very shady space over there. I can't recommend boxwoods enough for these part shaded areas in your garden. You know, they're going to say full sun on the tag, and they're absolutely fine in the full sun, but don't discount the fact that these are actually woodland plants in their native, as native plants, you know, in their native ranges. They're understory plants typically. And look how this thing hasn't been pruned back there in that shady space for, how long has it been in the ground? 18 months or something? 2 years maybe at this point. Now it has stretched a little bit because it's looking for light, right? But that can be, you know, on boxwoods we can prune them, and this is the time of year to prune them. So I dug this one up this morning and moved it over here. That's one thing we could do coming out of winter and early spring is plant them new or transplant them if they need to be transplanted. This one was small enough and hadn't been in the ground that long that I was able to just take it out of the ground and move it this morning easily. And if you see in the video, I use my shovel to kind of measure the width of the root ball and the depth of the root ball. And then I dig my hole the appropriate size so that when I take it and put it over there, you know, I don't have to pull it out of the hole 5 times trying to figure out how big the hole is. So dig that hole first before you start putting it in. If this plant had been much bigger, older, more established, I would have root pruned it initially. So about a month or 2 back, I would have gone around this plant with a shovel and just pruned the top roots on it and then let it stay there for a couple of months and then moved it to this space. So I would have prepped it some, but this one just hadn't been in the ground long enough for that. So planting, transplanting, and then the third thing we can do this time of year is definitely pruning. Most of the boxwoods are going to take the shape they're going to take. And so you want to buy a boxwood that kind of fits the shape that you ultimately want it. If you're trying to get a super low hedge, Renaissance is a perfect plant for that, or a low foundation plant, because this one can be maintained at about the height it is now, pretty much permanently, okay? We've got 3 other varieties out front that we'll go through in just a minute, and they're going to ultimately take different shapes in the garden. If you buy one that gets 8 feet tall or 6 feet tall and you're trying to keep it 3 feet tall, well, that's a bit of a battle. So within the Better Boxwood brand, you can buy the one that kind of fits the space. And so all I'm going to do on this, it's a great looking plant, right? But again, it's supposed to be a more low doming habit. I just had it in too much shade. So all I'm going to do on this one is come across the top and just slow this, ultimately just give it just the smallest haircut off the top. This will get some light down in the plant and allow it to then fill out down toward the bottom, back into a low doming shape, because I actually want to drop those, you know, basically have these limbs right down to the ground on this one. That's kind of the point of this one. And again, if you have low foundation windows, growing it along a sidewalk, someplace where you want just a really low, compact, almost no maintenance plant, because again, that was the maintenance I'm going to do to it. One other thing, so planting, transplanting, pruning, and then the other thing is fertilizing. So this is the time of year we would use some sort of slow release fertilizer. We use an organic fertilizer. Boxwoods actually like a kind of a neutral soil. A lot of the other plants we use in our landscapes here, especially on my channel, are acid loving plants, but boxwoods tend to like very neutral soil. They'll even take alkaline soil. So that's another thing. They're so adaptable in our gardens to different soil types, different pH ranges, but they don't need a special fertilizer really. So we used plant tone on the entire garden, and that's pretty much the perfect fertilizer for these. Just some sort of organic fertilizer coming out of winter. We'll keep weeds away from it, and we keep the ground well mulched, and we keep them evenly moist, and that's all we have to do. So once a year, and I've already done the fertilizing. It was in a video a couple weeks ago. We fertilized, I moved it, and I've just pruned it, and I shouldn't have to do anything else to this Renaissance boxwood the rest of the season. Two more quick small chores that you might have to do with your boxwoods. Number one, I really don't want things growing up against them necessarily. I'm trying to keep these in a form. These daffodils are up here temporarily. They've bloomed, and now it's going to take about a couple months for them to fade back into the ground. But then this is my permanent 12-month fixture out here. I'm going to have annuals growing in front. This bed is very changeable during the season, except for this one thing is like the center point. You know, that's the center of the bed where it stays the same year around. So I don't want this to get damaged by any temporary thing that's out here. So sometime during the season, if we have annuals growing out here or these bulbs come up in here, we'll make sure that we're not allowing those to damage this kind of 12-month piece we have in the garden. One other quick thing, if you have leaves down in them, so we have the one that we transplanted in the back, because it was in a shadier area, had a lot of leaves inside of it. So I did go in there and clean out some of those leaves. This is Babylon Beauty, and Babylon Beauty, so we think about Renaissance back there can be kept really, really small and low. This one has that same doming habit, but slightly taller. So if you have a slightly taller set of windows that you want to plant under, like if we were going to do boxwoods under our windows here that are about 4 feet off the ground, Babylon Beauty would be the one to use. And so with this one, again, all I'm going to do is just give it a slight little haircut off the top. And then we've already fertilized it. It's already mulched out here. It's already weeded. I'm going to make sure these daffodils aren't going to do any damage to it in the next few weeks. And that's literally the maintenance. You know, I revisit sometime during the season to make sure nothing's damaging it. But outside of that, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of put it in the shape that it's kind of naturally going to take anyway. And this one will just dome up to about 3 feet in height. Well, again, we can keep them any shape we want to keep them. It doesn't matter. But buying the one that kind of has that growth habit that you want initially will then require far less maintenance in the future. This is Skylight Better Boxwood, and if you want a boxwood that will kind of do anything, this is the one. I'm going to make this one kind of a pyramidal shape, tall and narrow out here in the front, but this one can be kept anything you want to do to it. It's probably fastest growing of the four. We've had them all four in the ground the same amount of time. They were all the same size when they were planted, and this one's not only taller, it's been pruned a couple times. So I think definitely if you're looking for speed in boxwood growth, that Skylight's going to be at the top of your list. So let's think about the conditions that I have in this garden. This spot gets the sun. It's about to come up over the house in front of us right now. This one will be in the sun for 15 hours today. It's happy next to this agave and this gazania and really, really tough perennial plants that like really harsh conditions. And so this one's in the most harsh condition in the entire garden, where we started off back there with that Renaissance in a shady, moist space. So really adaptable to pretty much any space in the garden. I've already pruned this one about a month ago, so I don't need to this morning. And I'm just coming over, on the sides of this one and just kind of creating a bit of a little pyramidal habit with this one for the future. But I could top it off if I wanted to and keep it low and mounding, or I could go even narrower if I wanted to. But I think Skylight's the most overall, whatever you want it to do, and it grows a little faster than the rest. Last but definitely not least is Heritage Better Boxwood. Look how full this plant is. It's surrounded by daffodils, and again, I want to make sure that these aren't going to harm it over the next few weeks. Some are just blooming, some are finishing up blooming, but we'll have to let that foliage die back, so I don't want them to hurt it in the meantime. This one's got a few leaves in it that I'll come in and pick out, but it doesn't need any pruning. This is probably, we've done almost no maintenance on these whatsoever since they went in the ground, but this one has had even less than less, okay? I don't think I've pruned it at all. And look how full that thing is. I really like Heritage a lot, and it has an upright, narrow growth habit. So again, Renaissance is here. Babylon Beauty is here. Skylight, whatever you want to do with it. If you need something faster growing, it can be made as a corner piece or a low screening plant, or kept as a small mounding thing. And then Heritage is definitely going to have this more of an upright. Basically every piece of new growth on this thing is wanting to go vertical, and I would just let that happen. If you need to, you can, if you get a branch out ahead of other things, you can prune that off if you need to, but really you're not going to have to do anything. I just love how full this plant is. Boxwoods are flowering plants, and this one is actually flowering right now as we're coming out of winter. Nothing showy about the flowers at all, but I can see that it's flowering down in there. But I really, Heritage is such a nice looking plant, and I think if you have this for the corner of a foundation, a spot in between windows where you need to get a height on a wall, or if you need a low hedge around a patio or something like that. And again, I've put basically no maintenance into this plant. It's a star of the winter garden. These daffodils come up now, bloomed, they'll go away. Perennials will come up in here, annuals will go in, all kinds of things happen all year long, but this is like the piece that stays centered and the same year round. So that's about it for boxwood maintenance. There's just not a whole lot. And really, I think as much as anything, it's about buying the right boxwood for the right space. And you know, getting that part right, it's even less maintenance. You just prune them once a year. If this gets out of shape in some way, I probably have until about midsummer to prune on them. So I can shear them now coming out of winter, and then I could shear them whatever time, but by midsummer or so, I probably want to stop shearing on them, because they do, when you shear on them, it forces a little bit of new growth, and that new growth could potentially be frost damaged, you know, if that new growth lines up with it getting cold later in the fall. So I don't want that to happen. So this window between now and like mid-July is kind of perfect for that. But there you go. There's some better boxwood maintenance, or boxwood maintenance in general, in the spring. It's not much, but the things we're doing to them now are going to keep them looking the best the rest of the season. Thanks for watching.